Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Good afternoon, Team Krulak community, and on behalf of the Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare in Marine Corps University, welcome back to the Broadcast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. Before we begin, please remember all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, or any other agency of the U.S. government. So today we're continuing our look at one of the themes that we've discussed on the broadcast a lot over the last several months, and that's the way that the many different entities around the Marine Corps are contributing to the fleet-wide changes underway with the Force Design 2030. And so we're pleased to welcome two guests from the Marine Corps Tactical System Support Activity, or MCTSSA, Major Stephen Gore and Captain Brian Atkinson, to tell us more about what MCTSSA does, their specific roles in naval systems integration and JADC2, and how all of this feeds into Force Design 2030. So our first guest is Major Stephen Gore, who's a Air Support Control Officer by trade and currently works in the Test and Certification Division in the Naval Systems Integration Branch as the Naval Systems Integration Branch Head. He has previously served as the Air Support Control Officer for the Aviation Combat Element of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, primary instructor for the Air Support Control Officer course at the Air Control Training Squadron in 29 Palms, and attended the Naval Postgraduate School with a specialization in artificial intelligence and autonomous systems. And our second guest is Captain Brian Atkinson, who is an infantry officer and currently serves as the Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or JADC2, lab officer in charge at MCTSSA. He has previously served as a weapons platoon commander and combined anti-armor platoon commander at 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines, and also attended the Naval Postgraduate School with a specialization in artificial intelligence and machine learning. So, gentlemen, welcome both to the broadcast. And as we discuss, I think the first thing we'll kind of get into, for the benefit of our wider audience, is this entity called MCTSSA. What does it do? What are some of the various things it provides to the Marine Corps? And, sort of where do you fit in the overall testing, evaluations, acquisition process? Or if I'm totally off base on that, you can correct me, but sort of where does it fit into the larger Marine Corps enterprise?
Sure. I'll take the lead on that. Thanks, Ian, for having us on the cast. So like most people in the Marine Corps, I'd never heard of MCTSSA before. I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go after Naval Postgraduate School. MCTSSA is a subordinate command of MARCOR SysCom, Marine Corps Systems Command, part of the acquisition community for the Marine Corps. Our job is to really do three things. First and foremost is to provide 24/7 global technical support to the Marine Corps and Fleet Marine Forces. That's through our Warfighter Support Division, or what the fleet may know it as the Marine Corps Help Desk. You can call them anytime, ask for any issues that you might have for any of your programs of record systems. On top of that, we have to do test engineering, certification, as well as experimentation on all of the Marine Corps C5I systems that we have here, as well as amphibious vehicles through our amphibious vehicle test branch. Last thing is that we have some internal I2SD infrastructure stuff that supports just general all-around MCTSSA operations. And all of this, because we're part of MARCOR SysCom, feeds back to inform the acquisition community on how to make the most informed acquisition decisions. So our CO, in a nutshell, likes to summarize it into three key main focus areas: support the warfighter, support Force Design 2030, and support the program offices.
All right, great. So I think this actually leads into, let's get into sort of your respective areas inside of MCTSSA and what you cover. So I know I just read out your billets here and your bios, but what is it you both cover down on sort of on a day-to-day basis, and how does that tie into those larger three themes that you just mentioned from your commanding officer?
Sure. So for my team, the Naval Systems Integration Team, our main key focus is to support the deploying MEUs. They're our primary customer. We make sure that they are operationally capable when it comes to C5I systems integration. MEUs are a unique beast. As some may know, MEUs composite. They may or may not have had any previous MEU experience, and they come on board a ship that hasn't had a Marine presence on it anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So it's a very complex system getting the ship and the Marines and all of the systems prepped, ready, and integrated so that they can actually operate as a true integrated Marine Corps Navy team. And again, they may not have had the prior experience of bringing their systems on board. So our team has that resident knowledge. We work with the Muse to try and get all their systems interoperating properly with all of the Navy systems, and then do that all prior to them deploying within their MU PTP cycle. Our team also does testing and engineering for any Marine Corps programs of record systems, as well as Navy programs of record systems that we have here at MCTSSA, trying to leverage all of the greatest capabilities that we can out of those systems. And then we have some other key focus areas to include JSF integration, as well as CAC2S afloat integration, the Common Aviation Command and Control afloat variant. It's an Air C2 system that the Navy has procured as well.
All right, great. So, and Captain Atkinson, I'm going to ask you the same question here, but in part of answering that, it might be helpful as well for our audiences. I don't know if you can give like a quick explanation of JADC2, but before sort of going into your roles and responsibilities in that as the officer in charge, what is JADC2? Like, why is the Marine Corps trying to plug into it? And then what's your responsibility with it there at MCTSSA?
Absolutely, sir. So the easiest analogy, I'm a big analogy guy. So the easiest analogy that I've ever heard for JADC2 is a Traeger grill. Traegers are a system that is designed to, for the most part, be self-controlling. I give it a couple of settings, or I tell it what exactly I'm trying to do, and it, for the most part, will manage itself using a suite of sensors. And using those suites of sensors, it will, when it needs to, provide me data. I can check in on it, so that way I'm not necessarily controlling it, but I can overwatch it and supervise it. JADC2 is kind of the military version of a Traeger grill, where we're essentially attempting to take all of our systems that we currently have and all of our sensors and tie them together, so that way there's autonomous data flows, not just within the Marine Corps, but across all the branches of service, and then ideally our coalition partners as well, where we can access the data when need be, but it's being passed between all of the different platforms automatically, and we're able to essentially close our circuits and make faster decisions because the data is interoperable amongst everywhere. So very like 2-minute spiel on what JADC2 is. As far as what the lab itself does, is we are the primary and I believe the only lab working for the Marine Corps to do JADC2. JADC2 is a congressionally mandated initiative that was started a couple of years ago. So all the branches of service have their own independent efforts that are all working to figure out what this thing that we call JADC2. The Army has Project Convergence. The Navy and the Marine Corps both respond to Project Overmatch, and then the Air Force has their own JADC2 efforts. So inside of the lab, we work primarily for the Project Overmatch leadership, the Marine Corps Project Overmatch Leadership Office that's over in System Command. And we do a lot of work for them, testing pieces of gear or equipment that are being developed to essentially enhance Marine Corps capabilities and interoperability with our partner services. We also do a lot of work internally to try figuring out what our fight tonight capability is in terms of command and control, and then looking to the future, keeping our eyes on the horizon for finding emerging capabilities, not just with programs of record, not just with programs, but with technology as well, to provide the Marines of the stand-in force, Marine littoral regiments, pretty much anyone that's going to be going into the island chain, the most capability possible and the most sensible packaging possible. So in order to provide the sensible packaging, we're also constantly looking at trying to reduce the form factor and the size of things, keeping the terrain of the area that we're talking about operating in and the grunts in mind, because not everything is going to be vehicle movable anymore. So in a quick nutshell, that's what we do in the lab.
Okay, great. And then I think before getting into sort of more specific end items here, if maybe both of you could, you've sort of touched on it already, but maybe describe, you've already talked about the stand-in forces and, you know, the Marines out there on the islands, but what are some other ways in which MCTSSA's work is aligning to kind of the guidance and doctrine that, you know, one, it came out from the Commandant's Planning Guidance, but also it's been broken down into the different aspects of Force Design 2030, whether it's the stand-in force or RXR or sort of competing that non-kinetic aspect?
Sure. Like most Marine Corps commands, we use those as our guiding documents, primarily taking it in, seeing what the commandant and the joint staff is commonly interested in, and then using that as sort of our shaping and decision-making on what we choose to pursue. MCTSSA is also uniquely situated in the sense that we receive a lot of input from the fleet. Whatever the fleet is interested in, MCTSSA is also interested in. As we get requests in through our Warfighter Support Division and seeing what kind of issues they're trying to tackle, that aligns with what we see as Force Design 2030 initiatives. All of the engineers and teams and branches here at MCTSSA take a keen interest in that as well. So we see it as sort of twofold, both the top-down guidance from key leadership, as well as bottom-up from the fleet forces and deploying units that are downrange and actually trying to solve these issues time now.
All right, Capt. Max, is there anything to add on top of that?
Not necessarily, no, sir. I mean, that hit it right on the head. And the thing is, I say the stand-in force because that's what, we're looking to essentially focus our efforts towards based off of our national defense strategy and all that. But really, these things that we work on are applicable to the Marine Corps as a whole. And it's not geographically specific. All of this can be applied anywhere. And we do a lot of work for all of the MEFs, not just 3 MEF, to apply these things that we.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I think that's a good point to make, is that a lot of the changes underway are, 3 MEF's gotten a lot of attention, but it's not just about them. It's about the fleet across the MEFs. Okay. So Major Gore, I want to come back and dig a little bit more into sort of your wheelhouse here. I know you've got naval systems integration as your bailiwick, and I hear that, and it's been a while since I've been on MU, but I have memories of, there are some challenges to, the Marine Corps element with the MU integrating into naval systems. Stuff as simple as, there's a blue network and there's a green network, and just getting those two networks to talk to each other can sometimes be, it takes a little bit of work, right? So, and I would imagine that only gets more complex when we're talking about some of the, the newer systems, or trying to get our systems plugged into the Navy systems as they're going through Project Overmatch. So, what are some of the sort of the detailed issues and challenges that you're looking at in the context of all this new stuff with naval systems integration?
So yeah, you're absolutely right. As I said previously, that ship has been in a maintenance cycle from anywhere from 2 to 5 years without a lot of attention for it. So when that comes out of the yard, comes out of its maintenance cycle, it's not in great shape. The Marine Corps systems on board are not well taken care of by the Navy personnel, by ship's force. Some of that's being addressed by the Marine Amphibious Communication Detachment. Those are the comm Marines that work for the expeditionary strike groups. And their key task is to provide a warm start capability for any embarking forces going on amphibs. They are a great capability. They've been growing over the years, but it's still quite a challenge to come on board a ship. And that ship is just not ready for Marines. It takes a long time to actually get it up and running. There's the programmatic side of it. So working with the Navy program offices to make sure that all the systems are accounted for. So prior to the MU compositing, our team goes on board. We work with NAVWAR, PEO, C4I, and all the requisite Navy program offices to conduct assessments on the infrastructure of the ship. And a lot of the time, antenna systems, radio systems, even the network, like you said, the Marine Corps network isn't up to par and needs a lot of work, even prior to the MU coming on board. So we work with the program offices, make sure that all of that is fixed prior to the MU coming on board, compositing. And then after the MU composites, we work very closely with the MU S3 and the MU S6 to figure out what exactly they want to do for their tour, for their deployment, their patrol, seeing what key new ways that they want to leverage systems, how they want to employ their tactical systems. And we make sure that how they envision all of their systems interoperating together, when they actually plug it into that a float network or a float environment, that it can actually be done, that all the systems are talking the correct communication protocols, that the network supports what they want to do. And then when they do ship to shore transmissions, that it can actually support that as well. A lot of it has some key issues with funding priorities for the Navy as well. The Navy has a lot of things to fund. Ships are expensive. It's not just the amphibs they have to worry about. So when it comes to prioritizing funding, amphibs sort of get the short end of the stick as well. They don't get a lot of money from modernization, as well as the Navy's modernization process is an incredibly slow process. It's the epitome of big ships turning slow. A lot of the upgrades on the ship are 5 to 10 years old, and that's the most recent upgrade being installed because it had to get approved by a board of captains and admirals about 5 years ago while the ship enters its maintenance cycle. So dealing with all of those interoperability challenges is what really our team's trying to get after, is just making sure that the MU is ready to deploy and that we can provide that technical expertise to make sure that their systems are working in a way that they want to use downrange.
Great, thank you. And I want to just expand on that a little bit too, because you talked about the Navy's readiness, and I know that's been a kind of a hot topic of conversation. Certainly from the Commandant's side, recently looking at ensuring that there's enough amphibious assets to enable the Marines to do the mission that we're required to do. So, what's been the impact of some of those naval readiness issues on the Marine Corps side's ability to do that proper naval integration?
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of things there. So first, everyone's focused on the number of amphibs. We've decided 31 is the number, and that's a very rigid number. And there's a lot of work that's been gone on to develop the correct number of amphibs that we need. And there's a lot of issues with that. Again, funding, ships decommissioning cycles, extending those certain ships. So that's one part of it, one aspect of it. We need the necessary number of amphibs to conduct the missions and the O plans that the Marine Corps needs to conduct, Marine Corps and Navy. But on top of that is the maintenance and readiness of the amphibs that we do have. A lot of them are really old ships. And sort of keying into what I said before, the funding priorities for modernizing those amphibs and the maintenance for those amphibs is pretty low priority for the big Navy. And I would say that that's probably one of the biggest problems with the amphib community. The Marine Corps still very much values the MU. It was said in the Commandant's guidance and the Force Design 2030 documents that the MU is still the crown jewel of the Marine Corps force and readiness. But the Navy has a very different view of the ARG, or the Amphibious Readiness Group, or Amphibious Ready Group, that supports the MUs. It's a much lower priority for the Navy. So there's a slight disconnect on what the Marine Corps prioritizes and what the Navy prioritizes. And really what it comes down to is funding. The systems on board the ships are outdated. The Navy is choosing not to modernize a lot of programs. The biggest key one is the HF capability off of the ship. There's a program of record on the ship called the HF SAR. It's the Marines' HF capability off of the ship, and it's not being modernized. The Navy has chosen not to modernize it. They're still trying to find a solution for that requirement for the Marines to have an HF data pathway off of the ship, data and voice. But come the end of this year, that program will become obsolete and the Marines will not have an HF voice or data capability off of the ship. So really a big key issue there that both MARCOR Syscom is trying to address. Our team here at MCTSSA is trying to work with various Navy program offices to find a stopgap measure so that the Marines can actually provide or conduct HF voice and data communications from ship to shore, as well as within the joint architecture as well, because Captain Atkinson will probably update it a little bit more, but HF is a key aspect of the JADC2 joint infrastructure or architecture.
All right, great. Thank you. Again, to our audience, if you guys have any questions, just go ahead and throw them in the chat here as we're going, and I will go ahead and weave them in as we talk. But Captain Atkinson, I was going to come to you next, but since let's use the HF as sort of the next jumping off point to you. What to our audience, what role does the HF play inside of that larger joint information architecture?
It's funny. HF is the wavelength that we probably like working with least because it is the hardest to set up and get working properly, but it's also the most reliable that we have. There are a lot of key players in this next, as we're getting ready for whatever comes next, that are planning on leaning very heavily on HF in a peer or near peer conflict in terms of their communication pace plan. And tying into what Major Gore said, we really aren't interoperable with the Navy, even with even with the pieces of equipment that we already have, we don't have a data pathway to the Navy from the Marine Corps over HF. And that's one of the many things that we work on over here at MCTSSA. Yeah, because everyone is looking to at least be able to rely on HF because of how dependable.
All right, great, thank you. And then next thing I had up for you, Capt. Atkinson, was I know you'd mentioned kind of in the intro here talking about the Common Aviation. Scroll down here. Common Aviation Command and Control System as something that's part of that JADC2 architecture. And I was looking at a quick description of it here from General Dynamics, and I think I just missed the window for when it was getting fielded coming out of the aviation community, and seeing all the improvements that it potentially offers. So can you maybe, and obviously especially if we're looking at things like the stand-in force, operations in the first island chain to effectively compete and counter PRC, expansion and sort of, throwing their elbows around. Aviation is going to be it's kind of the only way to get around in a lot of those places rapidly. So what is the CAC2S architecture, and then what is it going to bring to the table to both the ACE and how the Marine Corps is going to plug into the JADC2 architecture?
So the CAC2S it's a piece of equipment that the wing uses to essentially do all of their air control, right? The members of the DASC are viewing radar feeds to be able to essentially figure out what the air picture looks like in order to do routing and safety of flight of all blue aircraft, as well as coordinate our aircraft in terms of air interdictions, that kind of stuff. So it's essentially their eyes to allow them to control the airspace. It's a program of record. It's been around for a pretty good while, and it's an extremely capable system. But really what it leverages is the different data feeds. So as a grunt, my command and control system when I was a platoon commander was a map and a VHF radio, handheld radio. The thing is if I was looking at targeting something, I was essentially looking at it with my own eyes, finding it on a map, and then doing like a call for fire or maybe like a CAS-9 line up to an aircraft. But what we're talking about for the next conflict, there's going to be a lot more deliberate targeting that's going to be going on, deliberate and dynamic targeting that's going to be happening. And we're going to need something that's a higher fidelity information sources than just the Mark II eyeballs and a radio source. So the CAC2S is our way of communicating and controlling the air picture. And what that essentially leverages is the Link 16 waveform, right? So that's the aviation community's way of passing data between aircraft and essentially ground stations or ground control stations. The CAC2S equipment suite has the ability to participate in the Link 16 network, which is a harder thing to do than it sounds. And we use it inside of the lab to essentially access the Link 16 network, or what I call like the Link 16 picture, to be able to get higher fidelity information on all of the different things that are out there in the battle space: air, surface, land, subsurface, you name it. So in terms of its importance, it's not the answer, but it's the current answer, because in reality, we all know how the acquisition system works, and it takes years to field new capabilities. So in terms of a fight tonight capability for command and control, when we're talking about needing near real-time, high-fidelity information on where the enemy is, a system like the CAC2S takes on a huge level of importance for us from a command and control perspective, not just for the air, but for everything, because it has such a high update rate. And Major Gore, sir, I'll turn it over to you if you want to add on.
Yeah, I'll just add in a little bit more background on CAC2S. So CAC2S, like Captain Atkinson said, was the primary C2 system for the MAX, the Marine Air Command and Control System. And the MAX is inherently joint. Aviation is inherently joint. The air tasking order and everything that goes through to leverage aviation assets is already a joint process. And due to the MAX having to work with surface fires, air defense, missiles, surface-to-air missiles, it's inherently multi-domain as well. So over the years, CAC2S, as it evolved as a program, sort of became accidentally or inherently a great JADC2 capability, or JADC2 C2 system. and it's been leveraged within the JADC2 initiative. Captain Atkinson talked about it. It was sort of a key player, key system in integrating all of the Army and Navy systems for Project Convergence 22, which I think Captain Atkinson will talk about a little bit later. But as he said, as of right now, it's really the critical enabler for making sure that in a joint environment that we can actually conduct track warfare, that we can sense using the sensors associated with the MLR, with the MACG or the MAX agencies, bring that data into a command and control center, whether that be the MLR, whatever SIF headquarters that they choose to employ, or within agencies within the MAX, such as the MAOC, the Multifunction Air Operations Center, and then also leveraging all those tactical data links that he mentioned, whether it be RF Link 16, VMF waveform, or K-series messages down to shooters. Basically, it's what's enabling us to kill or close the kill web and kill chains through all of its integrated data forms and its C2 capabilities.
All right, great. Thank you both very much. So I'm going to start turning to audience questions now because we got a bunch coming up in the chat. So, and then the first couple, they're sort of related, so I'm going to tie them together, and hopefully I'm not trying to package too much into one question. But this is from both Ted Vissian and Albert Lee, and this gets into sort of like the joint aspect of JADC2 and naval integration. So first part is how is the Marine Corps either already tying in or planning to tie in onshore with U.S. Army and allied partner militaries as sort of part of the overall architecture of this? And then secondly, in where it's already tied in, what has been the working relationship with those other elements of the joint force who this is supposed to tie the Marine Corps to?
Okay, so I'm going to kind of break this into pieces. So the first piece, I guess, is to address the JADC2 piece. JADC2 it's not a network. It's an idea or a construct, if you will. It's an abstraction to make sense of a function that we're looking for. So there's not going to be a JADC2 or like a joint network per se. It's more going to be us figuring out, I say us being the different branches of service, figuring out what kind of connections that we need to make in order to be able to pass data between each other, to be able to create like the kill web, so to speak, having multiple pathways to get data from point A to point B. In terms of the workings with other services, which both of them talk about, it depends on what piece of the kill web we're talking about. So the beautiful thing about all of this is that we currently have the capability as it sits, right? Between CAC2S and the artillery, advanced field artillery tactical data system, FATIDS, we have this ability to essentially do a lot of joint data passage already, right? So when we're talking about finding, fixing, tracking in part of the F2T2EA, like the targeting cycle, we leverage systems like CAC2S because the Link 16 network is a joint and coalition network already. It's already built and being used by all of the Link 16 has been around for 40 years or so. It's been a long time, and it is an extremely reliable network that we've already been using amongst all of the services and coalition partners for a couple of decades now. So when we're talking about working and connecting between the different services, Link 16 is one of the many different pathways that we have. And then CAC2S is essentially our belly button on the ground side into the Link 16 picture. On the fire side of the house, right, because at the end of the day, all of this is with shooting ships or airplanes in mind. We're now talking about passing data to the artillery communities because they're going to be the owners of those missile systems that we're essentially trying to enable. And between the Army and the Marine Corps, we already have the JADC2 capability. It's called a FATIDS, right? A FATIDS is how we've been doing our artillery-based fires for a long time now as well. And through a FATIDS, it doesn't matter if you're talking to an Army or a Marine battery. As long as you set up your databases and your hierarchies properly, you're going to be able to pass missions between each other. So that's the JADC2 piece of this. And then we're talking about how do we work with the other branches of service. So Project Overmatch is the Navy's JADC2, Navy and Marine Corps' JADC2 effort. And we do a lot, we being my team and my lab, do a lot of work with the Navy primarily because as we've discovered, Interoperability with the Air Force and the Army is actually pretty good, and it's not that hard to do. They're a lot more eager to work with us as opposed to just telling us to figure out what we need to do in order to get data back and forth between us. The Navy, on the other hand, not so much. The Navy very much is focused on getting themselves ready, getting the ships ready to be able to go and fight a pure adversary. And they're not as concerned about us being able to communicate back and forth with them. And the answer that the Marine Corps has gotten when we bring up issues like, hey, I can't pass data to you over HF is, okay, well, here's our equipment suite. So you guys figure out how to make it work and, talk to us once you have an answer. So the way that we discover these issues is through all of the exercises that we do, like Project Convergence, right? Project Convergence is a recurring series of exercises that the Army's JADC2 effort puts on, the last of which was hosted out with us at MCTSSA in October of last year. And whenever we do these exercises, we're using either live players or extremely high fidelity representative simulation systems, sometimes virtual or constructive simulations, to represent all of the different key players. So Project Convergence being the perfect example. For this Project Convergence exercise that we did, the whole point was to find, fix, and then kill a series of ships. And in order to do this, we had an assortment of different sensors, right? So we had Air Force B-1s, F-35s from the Marine Corps, F-18s, Navy helicopters. We had Marine and Army radar systems. We had Marine-based ground sensors, all of which are doing their individual pieces and passing data back and forth to each other. Ultimately, that data is then making its way to some sort of a command element or a headquarters, a COC, if you will, who's then actioning that data and sending fire missions down to a Navy destroyer, which was real, and then simulated Marine and Army anti-ship missile systems to be able to do that. So inside of the lab, we work very, very closely with a couple of different naval labs. The Naval Information Warfare Center, which is down in San Diego, has an office that we do a lot of work with to do data interoperability experiments with, to be able to verify that these pathways exist. We actually just finished a test event with them last week going over the same stuff. And then in terms of the Army, whenever we do have opportunities to work with the Army, so Project Convergence being one of them, we always jump on them. But the biggest hurdle that we found is trying to work with the Navy. So I'm in phone calls with several different labs from the Navy multiple times a week. We're constantly doing tests with each other, comparing architectures, and then essentially trying to figure out what the workable solution is right now, and then what the solution in the future looks like in order to streamline our data pathways between each other.
Great, thank you. Major Gore, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to just double down on some of the things that Brian was keying in on. The interoperability challenges with the Navy is confounding. We're part of the same branch of service technically, or the same department, but just over the past 20, 30 years of our going two different ways with the Marine Corps and counterinsurgency in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then the Navy still focusing on sea supremacy and sea control, our systems have just diverged completely. And now we're seeing a lot of the interoperability issues. One sort of highlight for that was during RIMPAC 2022, we had a unit that basically had some naval integration objectives that said, I've got C2 systems, I'm taking custody of tracks and targets. How do I send that to a destroyer for them to leverage their Aegis weapon systems or some part of their Aegis weapon system to actually strike that target? And I asked, well, what C2 systems do you have? It's like basically a FATIDS and a handful of other things. And there is, at this point, no real interoperability between a FATIDS and really anything on a Navy ship. So in order for them to achieve those naval integration objectives, we had to find some pretty strange workarounds in order to pass the track from a FATIDS to basically a COP system. That COP system did a SAT shot to the top COP, and then that COP then got filtered down through the Navy's COP system, and they were able to then pull that track off of the COP, feed it into their Aegis weapon system, and then was able to simulate a strike on that target. But as you can imagine, there's a lot that can go wrong in that particular chain. So direct interoperability with Navy systems is one of our key issues that we're looking to get after. And it's not easy. The Navy, just as Captain Atkinson said, has slightly different priorities, even though it seems like we're one team, one fight. But it's been a challenge. I guess I'll just leave it at that. I think that was really the only key naval integration double tap I wanted to hit on.
Yeah, great, thank you. And it's yeah, listening to both of you sort of describe the challenges there, I'm like, kind of blew my mind that you're having you can interoperate better with the Army and the Air Force than with the Navy. Not what I would have guessed. You know, but I guess, as you said, like 20 years of the GWAT has sort of split things on different tracks, and now we're trying to bring it all back together. Okay, great. So I got a couple more questions here about CAC2S, but I'll get to those in a second. But kind of Major Gore, jumping off of your, you know, the integration of the systems with Navy platforms. You know, we know part of the overall force design sort of acquisitions of new stuff has been getting some new platforms, of which UAS is that's a big new player. And I've seen everything, you know, talking about our, you know, the MQ-9s that the Marine Corps is sort of using in, you know, collaborating with the Air Force on, all the way down to looking at some of the like little mini quadcopters that I'm seeing, you know, SOI East actually doing, you know, training on as part of their, you know, sort of their ground tactical, you know, fire support plan. So what are, I guess, kind of where are we in terms of integrating those systems to, as part of the joint aspect of that larger joint architecture, or pulling some of that joint architecture into integrating with those systems? And I imagine the Navy challenge would sort of remain with those, but if you could sort of maybe describe that, or, you know, and or how those new systems have been working with Army or Air Force components in the architecture.
Okay, I can speak to it only a little bit. We don't really work, our team doesn't work too much with unmanned UAS systems, though working with the Navy and the deploying MUs, they try and interoperate a little bit with them. So first and foremost, it's just easy to say, like, the more sensors out there, the easier it is going to be for us to sense and make sense of the battle space. So no harm in trying to integrate more sensors. How the Marine Corps is going about acquiring the sensors is sort of a strange beast. Group 1, small handheld UASs, great, very low cost funding, very easy. Marines can buy that with, Marine units can buy that with like O&M funds. Not saying that that's the proper way to do it, but they get to experiment with what works best for them. Then they feed that process back up through requirements to CD&I. CD&I then look at it and then go through the acquisition life cycle. The medium Group 3 UAS has been a real headache. Not many Marines were very happy with the RQ-21. I hear nothing but complaints from that system. We sort of played around with different Group 3 UASs, the VBAT being one of them. That seems to be the tool of choice for a lot of the deploying MUs, is to leverage that. Trying to remember, I believe it's a COCO product, so contractor owned, contractor operated, which means we haven't fully invested in the VBAT. It's not a program of record, but we're utilizing it for deploying MUs. And then because of that, because it's not a program of record, integrating that system into the afloat architecture and the Marine architecture is incredibly challenging. We had a Marine controlled group detachment ask, how can we utilize the VBAT and its sensing capabilities into, how can we integrate that into CAC2S afloat, so that we can either see what it's seeing in CAC2S, or if it can generate a track from its own position location information, how can we get that into a targetable or at least SA track within CAC2S? We looked at it, we talked with the contractors, and it was an incredibly complex process. So even working with that Group 3 contractor-owned, contractor-operated Group 3 UAS had a lot of nightmares and a lot of issues associated with integrating it as a standalone system into our own architecture, and then even into the joint architecture. For the larger Group 5 UASs, the MQ-9s, they've been operating and they have a lot of integration that's just inherent to them. They're a great capability. We're trying to work more with them here at MCTSSA. So we support a semi-annual exercise with 1MEF and 3rd Fleet, their constructive kill exercise, where they come together, they pull in Army players, Air Force players, live ships, live air. We're working with the Air Force to sort of bring in MQ-9s into the picture. as well as if once we get to into the exercise, the Marine MQ-9s, and just seeing how that can be fully leveraged into the C5I infrastructure. That's all I really had. Captain Atkinson might be able to speak a little bit more on JADC2 efforts.
So I guess the only thing I'll add for the UAS piece is there's a lot of like science and technology work that's being done by Project Overmatch, which again is the Navy's JADC2 office, to build out our UAS capability to do a bunch of different stuff. And that will all I don't want to say plug in, but it will interoperate with the Marines, Navy. All of that is being built with that in mind. That's all I can really say about that.
Okay, thank you. And I guess while we're sort of on the topic, I think we said we were going to circle back to it, but in terms of the I've heard Project Overmatch here a couple of times. Could you maybe describe a little bit in more detail, what that's the Navy's approach to JADC2, right? And how we're going to sort of nest under there. So maybe sort of flesh it out a little bit more for our audience, if you could.
Sure. Let's think. So again, Project Overmatch is working to realize, I guess, what JADC2 looks like for the Marine Corps and Navy. It's the Marine Corps side of it is being run out of Systems Command in Quantico, and they have a list of things that they want to work towards, or pieces of technology that they want to develop to essentially enhance the capability of the Marine Corps, either just within the Marine Corps to make Marines have more capability at their fingertips, or to be able to participate in a theater-wide conflict, just as JADC2 implies, right? So essentially being able to participate with all the other coalition or joint partners that we have out there. Really what it is it's an S&T office. They do a lot of technological development and research that ultimately gets fielded as programs of record within the Navy or the Marine Corps. Kind of a vague answer, sorry, but yeah.
So I'll double down on why he's kind of being vague there. Much of Project Overmatch is classified, so we got to kind of be careful about what we talk about here. But because our team supports Project Overmatch as well, and we work very closely with the JADC2 team, I would summarize it as really two main capabilities. And one of it is communication and networking mergers, making sure that everything can talk on I won't say the same network, but almost like a network of networks. I'll leave it at that. And then second is, once that capability is fleshed out, providing tools on that network for basically anyone that's on that capability, Project Overmatch capability, to leverage those tools no matter where they're at. As you can imagine, that could be a lot of cloud, edge computing type of deal.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to come back now to the two questions on CAC2S, and again, I'm going to try and sort of compile them together. But if I goon this up, feel free to just take it one piece at a time. I'll circle back to it. So this comes both from Major Janikin, who's over at MSTP, and then Austin Duncan, who's been a long time, I would say, plank holder of Team Krulak efforts here in terms of looking toward aspects of future warfare. So I think this is maybe like a 2 or 2.5 part question, and see if I can do this right. So in talking one for CAC2S, in terms of its impact and improvement on aviation command and control specifically, has its adoption generated any changes to the structure of the Marine aircraft control groups where it's used? And then second piece from Austin, which is, he's saying some have suggested that the CAC2S may be a better foundation for MAGTF C2 as a whole in the future. And what are your thoughts on that? And then point 2.5 is, when looking at CAC2S versus the old program C2PC, is the CAC2S potentially the way of the future, or do you see this more as maybe an improvement as a placeholder into a sort of a different program, a different approach to do it all together? And I can repeat any of those pieces if that was too garbled here in my delivery.
Major Gore, do you want to take the first one? I'll take the second.
Yeah. So I'll take the first one. So CAC2S has been around for a little while. I would not say it's the driving force of the restructuring of the MACGs or the MACs. That's really been community driven as we look to the future and see how to combat the pacing threat and seeing what the deficiencies were in the MACs. So quick, small little PME on the MACs for those that don't know it. The Marine Air Command and Control System. It's the direct air support center that blends the air aviation assets to support the ground units doing procedural air control, processing of immediate support requests, making sure that the ground units get the aviation assets that they need. That's one agency. The TAOC, Tactical Air Operations Center, works the air defense picture, making sure that we have local air superiority or air dominance. That's integrating or conducting integrated air and missile defense missions, tying in with the Army Patriot systems and as well as Navy Aegis systems, LAD, low altitude air defense, and the TAC, the Tactical Air Command Center, where the wing or ace commander hangs his or her hat, and just operates the ace out of. So that particular construct has worked historically in the past decently well. But if you look at the type of area which we'll be operating in the future, very dispersed, disaggregated, those central areas or those centers don't really work well. You can't really phase them out, push them out that well. So the community saw that, and then now they're shifting towards the Multifunction Air Operations Center, a singular agency which basically has a lot of the Air C2 capabilities and mission sets. And then that in turn can then push out small elements and disaggregate more with the same central capability, but just for different AORs or areas within the operating system. So rather than CAC2S driving that, it's more the community driving it and then pushing the requirements for the program office to meet the new requirements for how they plan to operate. That's the first one. I don't even remember the second and third one, but I think you got it, Brian.
It's on our favorite system, C2PC.
Yeah.
So the second question was essentially the newest. One of the newer topics of debate is CAC2S versus C2PC, right? So C2PC is the command and control personal computer. Major Gore mentioned it earlier mentioned the COP earlier, the common operating picture. And for the last 2 decades or so, the COP or the common operational picture is how we've been command and controlling our forces, right? Iraq and Afghanistan were in some senses very simple theaters because the things that the entities that we were tracking are moving at like land vehicle speeds, and the things that we were targeting usually weren't moving, right? Or if they were moving at pretty slow speeds. And it's what we as Marines feel like is home. It's comfortable for us. And so when you go into any COC right now, you're going to see C2PC somewhere as the COP. That's what we're used to. The issue that this kind of stems off of, other than its absolutely awful user interface, is the time scale at which C2PC updates, right? So when we talk about data that's going across a network for sensors, there's 3 different time scales. You've got real time, which an example of a real time data feed would be a radar return or a radar feed. Radar feeds are real time. If you see it, it's happening right now. There's near real time, which examples of that would be something like Link 16, or essentially what I would call Link 16 over the internet, just because we don't need to get too technical about it. And those are operating on millisecond to hundredths of a second latencies, extremely small latencies or delays. And then you have non-real time, which updates on the orders of seconds to minutes. It really just depends on what you're getting your feed from. And that would be where C2PC operates off of. C2PC is a non-real-time system. And when we're talking about fighting against the PRC, the things that we're going to be targeting are ships and jets. And if I'm receiving updates on a position for, let's just say, a ship that's moving at 40 knots, I can't target off of that, considering some of my weapon systems or some of the missiles that I'm going to be using to target that ship need to be getting within a small number of nautical miles, a very small distance away from that ship as it's approaching. And when I'm receiving updates on the order of 20 to 30 seconds or maybe a couple of minutes, it's For ships, it's really difficult, and for fixed wing aircraft, it's completely impossible. So C2PC is it's a capable system. It's worked for us for a long time, but unfortunately, we need to move faster than C2PC can really operate at. It's not designed to update at that speed, especially given the number of entities that it's going to have to be tracking. So turning our attention away from C2PC, CAC2S is the thing that everyone is looking to right now, right? CAC2S, I've already mentioned, rides off of the Link 16 radio RF network, and it's receiving near real-time updates from all of the different aircraft that are essentially within Link 16 range of that sensor. That network can be extremely large, and we have the ability to have high fidelity eyes everywhere, so to speak. CAC2S is it's the program of record that we have right now to access the Link 16 picture. So in some senses, it's better. Inside of my lab, it's what we've been using as our COP, because in reality, I'm seeing everything that C2PC would display, but at a much higher update rate and with higher fidelity. CAC2S is also not the answer, because unfortunately, the actual full-blown CAC2S system is a series of 2 shellbacks that both weigh 3,000 pounds apiece and require a Humvee or a 7-ton to be able to move over land, right? And we're talking about some of the islands in the Southern Pacific, like the Philippines, for example. The Philippines, a lot of that country is not trafficable by vehicles, and a 3,000-pound shellback is not the answer to being able to provide that kind of situational awareness that we need. So one of the things that we work on in the lab is being able to find viable substitutes for a CAC2S that are in a small enough form factor that I can put it inside my backpack and be able to walk around with it and still be able to get the same data feed that a CAC2S system would have, maybe minus some of the communications suites that make the CAC2S shellbacks so large. So in terms of looking towards the future, one of the many talking points that we have inside of my lab is moving away from C2PC and towards something that's like CAC2S in terms of capability, but with a different form factor. One of the things that we worked towards was removing one of the virtual machines out of CAC2S. It's called ADC, the Air Defense Systems Integrator. We took this virtual machine, put it inside of a laptop, and are able to essentially view all of the same picture that CAC2S has. But instead of requiring, again, those 6,000 pounds worth of shellbacks, I have a laptop and essentially a router that connects me to the internet. And I'm now able to get all the same data feeds, but at a significant fraction of the hardware overhead. Let me look at the question feed one more time to remember where the second one was going.
I can kind of key in on the second one. So Brian kind of already hit on it, that CAC2S was originally designed as an aviation command and control system, but because it's so incredibly robust and capable, can it be actually moved to like a MAGTF C2 system? It was the commandant at the time, he basically said to the lead of our community that programmatically the worst thing that we did in CAC2S was put the A in CAC2S, the aviation side of it, Common Aviation Command and Control System. There's been many initiatives to try and get CAC2S to be the MAGTF C2 system, but just the weird way in which money is appropriated in Congress and seeing like, why does non-aviation units need an aviation command and control system? It just got weird on trying to allocate funds to buy more CAC2S, coupled with the fact with, Captain Atkinson hit on a couple of key issues. It's a big system. They're trying to make a small form factor version of it that's going through the program office right now. But I would also say that it's an over-designed system for the vast majority of ground units that need to use it. It has a lot more capabilities to do aviation C2 than they need. So it's not a well-utilized allocation of funds and resources to give everyone in the Marine Corps a CAC2S, which is why the work that the JADC2 lab is and taking the key critical components out of CAC2S that the ground guys need and give them that capability or work the programmatics of that capability, I think is the solution. I think the JADC2 lab is on the right track for that particular capability.
Hey, great. Hey, I appreciate both of you chewing on that. That was a pretty robust series of questions there. So appreciate you breaking that down and laying that context out for our audience. So I do have a couple more questions here, and we are getting close to an hour here. So I'm gonna hit these questions, and then I got a couple more points for you both, and then we'll wrap it up here. But I want to first question. I'm gonna jump the line a little bit and go to our friends out there at the C5 ISRT course, and this is from Gunnery Sergeant Savingji from Victor 1-2, and it's question is sort of so kind of a problem statement and then a question is. He says we like Marine Corps, we're a systems platform centric service, and then JADC2, however, it's data and network focused, and it looks like or some of our previous and current attempts are trying to kind of fix the current problems in terms of interoperability and reducing redundant or unnecessary systems, but how does that square with kind of looking forward to away from the systems platforms to that data network focus? So I guess I'm paraphrasing here, but sort of how does your work and the work of MCTSSA kind of square that circle where you've got systems and programs that you're responsible for, but the concept is it's a data network driven concept, not necessarily tied to a system?
So the first thing I'll say is within the lab itself, we don't hold allegiance to any program of record, right? So our goal is finding capabilities that are sensible and the most feasible or practical, I should say, not just fixing the current programs of record. We're going to be the first group of people to tell you that we don't like C2PC and we think that the Marine Corps needs to move away from it, right? And that's blasphemy depending on which program office that you come from. So the answer is not just fixing the current interoperability issues. It's partly fixing the current interoperability issues because the reality is our acquisition system isn't very fast. Even when we try to be fast, it's still not that fast. So despite what we want, some of this is going to have to be fixing current problems that we have within programs to make sure that there is a capability right now, because I can't afford just to say that I'm just going to develop something new and then buy it 3 years from now, because that leaves us essentially empty-handed for 3 years, right? In terms of looking towards the future and finding new solutions, there's a lot of that that's going on. Industry is working very hard. Private industry, I should say, is working very hard to develop tools like battle management aids that will do a lot of this for us with essentially joint interoperability in mind. There are systems like Minotaur, which is a track management system that essentially will ease the access or make it easier for people to access the Link 16 picture and some other exquisite data feeds and be able to pass data between services. It's just a program that people can buy into, almost like government off the shelf, that a lot of branches are buying into right now. And then groups like 1MEF, the 1MEF G9, their experimentation office is looking at battle management aids like Lattice, which is an operating system developed by Anduril, a defense contractor. And these tools are being developed with joint interoperability in mind, and it's essentially for joint interoperability as a brand new kind of scratch capability to provide us the ability to cross communicate instead of just doing the Band-Aid patch system that we're so used to seeing within the military, right? I want this new function. I'm just going to build a quick plugin for my Fated so that way I can do, I don't know, whatever with it. It can do my calculus homework for me. And then at some point, calculus changes and now I need a new plugin. That's ultimately what we do. And Project Overmatch works a lot towards that, right? Project Overmatch is looking for fixes to the current systems as well as emerging capabilities regardless of maturity level, and if need to, helping boost the maturity level of those capabilities to be able to provide joint interoperability. So fixing communication suites, finding interesting and useful applications for artificial intelligence and machine learning in the military operations spectrum, finding new communications pathways and developing new pieces of technology so that we communicate better and pass data between each other better. That's really what Project Overmatch does, right? It's essentially a technology boosting effort. But that's what I would say. Major Gore, anything?
Yeah, so I'll just add in that one of the key focuses that's sort of unstated about JADC2 is trying to close down the kill webs as fast as possible, right? Outcycle the pacing threat. And one of that is trying to move as close to machine speeds as possible. And the slowest thing in any kind of process in today's day and age is the people. So trying to eliminate swivel chair stuff as much as possible, and that's through the interoperability of systems and networks and data pathways, which again, that's what a lot of the JADC2 and Project Overmatch is focusing on, and then as well as leveraging AI and ML tools like Captain Atkinson mentioned to sort of speed up the decision-making process for where the humans are in the loop.
All right, great. Thank you both. So I'm looking at time. I think, unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut off a couple of the last questions here just so we can honor everybody's time. But I do have one last item I want to bring to both you gentlemen before we wrap up here. And that's, I reeling all the way back to an hour ago when we talked about your backgrounds. One of you's a former air control officer. Another's a former, well, I guess you're still current air control officer and you're still currently a grunt. But you wound up going to the Naval Postgraduate School to study and then implement these areas of learning kind of well outside where your career paths would have typically taken you. So if you maybe spend a couple minutes speaking to, from your respective communities, what drew you to, to getting yourself to somewhere like Naval Postgraduate School. And then once you've graduated there, I'm assuming this is your utilization tour, but then sort of following your initial utilization tour, where do those new skill sets from MPS potentially take you down the road?
So I'll start. I know Captain Atkinson has a lot to say on this subject as well. We've discussed this a lot. Naval Postgraduate School is a great opportunity. I had a good time there for the most part until COVID happened, and I'm just not a good distance learner, so I really struggled through that. But MCTSSA has the highest concentration of computer science and electrical engineer computer science graduates resident here within the entire Marine Corps. And I think that brings in a lot of capabilities. Am I leveraging my computer science knowledge to its greatest capability? Not really. A lot of the academic knowledge I have isn't really being utilized, but my ability to technically understand what the problems are, I think has helped by going to MPS. One of the cons is it takes us out of our community for quite a while. Computer science, which myself and Captain Atkinson are graduates of that program. It's a long program. It's the longest program at MPS. It's 2.25 years. And then we're in a utilization tour from anywhere from 3 to 4 years if you don't curtail it. So we will be out of our community for, 5 years and change. And that can be pretty hurtful. I was lucky to hit some key billets before going to MPS. I know Captain Atkinson has possibly missed some key billets, which is a little bit hurtful for him in his career. But the opportunities I feel like here at MCTSSA are fantastic. I would say that my knowledge of Force Design 2030, where the Marine Corps is going to, has given me a lot of background knowledge that I learned here at MCTSSA that I wouldn't have been able to unless I went to MPS. So I see it as pros and cons. I need to go back to the fleet after this, so I'm pretty sure I'm not going to go to any fun billets or command and staff after this. I know I'm being asked to go back to the fleet. People want to leverage the knowledge that I've learned here at MCTSSA back into fleet units. So again, I think there's a lot of benefits to coming to a place like MCTSSA after MPS. A lot of the other MPS utilization tours are not so great. The project officers that go to MARCOR Syscom proper, they do great things. It's fantastic. They have to work on projects, but they don't necessarily get on the gear, get into the systems, get into the nitty-gritty work that we do here at MCTSSA. So I'll leave it at that. And Brian, if you got anything you want to add.
I completely agree. Was not exactly the happiest about getting sent to NPS for a couple of reasons, but at the same point, working here at MCTSSA, it's been awesome. I realize how ignorant the grunt side of the community is to a lot of how the Marine Corps does command and control at like the battalion level. I mean, the battalion and below, all of this stuff was brand new to me. I also don't really leverage my degree, but every once in a while comes in handy talking about networks and like network infrastructures and things like that. But in terms of making a difference, MCTSSA has been super heavily involved with a lot of the Force Design 2030 planning and a lot of the actual functional planning for what's going to be how the Marine Corps is going to operate in the first and second island chain. And it's been extremely eye-opening to get a chance to be here, working with these different systems, playing around with new and emerging technologies well before the Marines get to use them too, and essentially helping educate Marines on how they could be using their gear better, right? Because as we all know, Marine Corps has purchased some fairly capable gear. We just usually don't know how to use it as well as we could. So it's been an awesome opportunity to get essentially just kind of grow and become better rounded, right? Just as every Marine officer strives to be.
All right, great. Thank you both for laying that out for anybody who's potentially looking at this as an opportunity, whether they get orders there or they apply to it. It's good information to know. All right, so we've been going well past an hour here, so I want to make sure we get everybody back to their next events for the day. So to Major Gore and Capt. Atkinson, thank you both very much for your time today. And I want to make sure we know Ms. Amy Forsyth, who's out there with MCTSSA as well, for helping set this thing up. And then for those in the audience, if your questions I didn't get to them, apologies. Just want to keep things in a good time window. But I'm going to post out social media as well as website information for MCTSSA. So if you have questions you want to direct to them, that's going to be in the show notes for when I post this out there. So you'll have an opportunity to pass that on. And then as well to the audience, we are the broadcast is not taking any arrests here for the next few weeks. Next week, we have 2 episodes coming up. First off, we're excited to bring another MCU internal asset that we have here onto the broadcast, and that's going to be our FBI chair, Special Agent Joseph Garbato, who's going to be talking about law enforcement as an instrument of power. And then the next day, we welcome back Dr. Elena Wicker, who we've had on before, but also some new names or new handles you might not have heard before, such as Magtrav, the Doctrinatrix, and Mother of Tanks. And we're bringing these folks on to those are their social media personas, but I bring that up because all of those folks there, this is across the services. They're very active in the social media and digital domain in terms of using it as a platform to help foster different aspects of professional military development. So we're excited to get a chance to bring them all together to talk about how they do that, how they've used these platforms, which, some people are kind of wary of these platforms, but they've turned them into opportunities for sharing and increasing information and professional development resources for people in the military. So we're going to have them all on, and we're also going to talk about how Magtrav almost won the Army Leadership's Final Four for online professional development. We were so looking forward to having a Marine possibly win an Army contest, but didn't work out. But anyway, 2 exciting episodes coming up, so make sure you're following us on our email distribution list or our various social media channels for the registration information for those. All right. Again, to our guests, Capt. Atkinson, Major Gore, thank you very much for your time. And like I said, we'll have this out here in the next day or so.
Thanks, sir.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks for joining us. As always, we depend on support and feedback from the Team Krulak community to constantly improve our offerings and reach a wider audience. So if you have feedback on this episode, please take a moment to fill out the survey linked in the show notes to help us do better. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, or leave us a review on the podcast app of your choice. It truly does help us reach a wider audience. Thank you as always for your support, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.